Hello, everyone, and welcome to Coffee and Old Money, a Gilmore Girls podcast. I'm just going to jump right into it. I'm Holly Trantham, TFD's Creative Director. Today, I am joined by my friend and former colleague, but also collaborator here at TFD, too, YouTuber and writer, Princess Weeks.
Hi, Holly. I'm so glad to be talking with you about our favorite, our favorite hyperfixation show.
So, Princess and I met. What would that have been? About 10 years ago.
Yes, Jesus.
Working at Bust Magazine as interns, and bonded pretty quickly over our shared love of the show Gilmore Girls. Mm-hmm. And I say love in the way that you love a family member, complicated, nuanced.
Right. The way Lorelai loves Emily.
Will I rewatch this show pretty much every year for probably the rest of my life? Yes. Mm-hmm. Do I notice new and different things to pick out every single time?
And that's exactly why we're friends. Because I remember once just trying to do something quick that was Gilmore Girls related online, and I ended up watching 6 episodes, and I was like, wait, I didn't actually want to do this.
It's so easy to get sucked in because it's so cozy. Mm-hmm. They talk so fast. My mom hated that growing up. She always made fun of me because of that. She would call them the fast talking ladies, and she never got into watching it. And I was like, but it's about a mom and daughter. She was not interested, but it's just so comforting. We're about the same age, so yeah. And when it was really popular, they would play 3 episodes of it on ABC Family every afternoon. I don't know if you remember that, but I would come home from school in middle school, high school, and watch it every single day. And then eventually I got the TV on DVD editions of all of it.
Yeah. I didn't grow up watching Gilmore Girls, which is always the funny part of it, because at that time the WB was just a very white network, and I think the only thing I really religiously watched on it was Charmed and Buffy before it switched. So I got into Gilmore Girls in college because my best friend and ex-girlfriend were both really into it, and it was to understand the inner workings of a suburban white girl, you really do need to understand Gilmore Girls to a certain degree, and it has paid off.
And I think one reason we really wanted to talk about it on a member podcast is because it's just everybody feels the same way about it. I think not the same way. People have different takes on things, but it's very easy to pick out the problematic things in it and also the things we enjoyed about it. And it's just a nostalgic show for so many of us. Mm-hmm. And it's about to be fall, so we wanted to...
Exactly.
It felt seasonally appropriate, I guess mostly because of that opening sequence.
And just Lorelai going snow.
Yeah.
There's just something about it that just is as soon as the pumpkin spice is out, I'm like, Lorelai's having the best time.
Exactly. So today in our first episode, we are going to be talking about the Chilton Years. Mm-hmm. The Chilton Years, we set the scene. What happens in the pilot of Gilmore Girls? We are met with Lorelai Gilmore, a spunky, fast-talking, everyone's dream best friend mom.
Yeah. Gutsy. I mean, the first thing that they do is punk some guy who tries to hit on Lorelai and then hit on Rory, and then Rory goes, "Are you my new daddy?" And I'm just and it's this is the beginning of what we will call peak Rory, because I think the Chilton Years are the time where people really love Rory and are frustrated with Lorelai, and then as soon as they go to college, it switches real hard.
I would agree. I think Rory loses her edge somewhere along the way. She has more of a chip on her shoulder in the Chilton Years, I think, than... I don't know if she ever has a chip on her shoulder, but she definitely shows more of an attitude a lot of times in the Chilton Years. And
she gets that Karen haircut. That's the reason. She cut her beautiful long hair into an atrocious bob. Oh. And it was just girl, she lost her power.
It wasn't my favorite. It definitely wasn't my favorite haircut, but I did like the change.
It symbolized something.
But that's later. That's later. We're not talking about those years.
Okay, sorry. We have the hair cape now.
Anyway, in the pilot episode, we meet Lorelai and Rory, this enigmatic duo, mother-daughter, but also best friends, because Lorelai had her daughter at 16, decided to eschew the family desired route of getting married and raising her daughter in the privilege that she grew up in. runs away, works her way up from maid to manager of an inn in a very nice small town in Connecticut it's called Stars Hollow. It is based on Washington Depot, is the real life town in Connecticut, which I have not been to, but I've always meant to. Yeah, we should go. We should go.
Putting it on the list. we can leave our men at home. We're going to go do Gilmore things.
Absolutely. Although Peter does watch it with me, so
I think my boyfriend would like it. He's soft, so I think he would enjoy the sweetness of it. Yeah.
Oh, I love that. But then when Rory gets off the wait list and gets into a fancy prep school called Chilton, which is the reason that we're talking about the Chilton Years in this episode, she cannot afford it. They do not receive financial aid, and she has to go back to her parents, who she sees maybe once or twice a year. At this point, she's very estranged from them. And her mother, Emily, agrees to pay for Rory's education on the condition that they are actually a part of their lives again. And Rory and Lorelai have to start going to Friday night dinners with their very rich parents/grandparents. They have to participate in their lives. They have to allow them to be a part of Rory's life, which which Lorelai hadn't really allowed because she felt like she was stifled growing up and didn't want the same thing for her daughter. And that's where the story. It's a lot of
stuff happens in that pilot.
A lot of exposition in that pilot for sure. So Lorelai did grow up like very wealthy, and she hated that world. And the main conflict of the series is her butting heads with her parents, but her mother.
Yeah, especially
her mother. So what's your take on this conflict and how Lorelai acts towards her parents?
You know, this is, I think, a very divisive topic for a lot of reasons. Because I think depending on how you grew up, the relationship that Lorelai and Emily have with her parents can feel very differently. One of my favorite professors growing up really related to Lorelai and the kind of like, I think, white upper middle class, like waspy conditions, and that is like a very foreign thing to me. And so especially as someone who comes from a period, like both my parents are immigrants, Caribbean background, I never saw Emily and Richard as that strict. And then, which I know is really hard to say, like it's like I mean, okay. And then I think when we get flashbacks and we see more of like what Lorelai's relationship with Emily and Richard is, it never really fully syncs up with what the show has told us she has dealt with, because even the way that they deal with the pregnancy, like, yes, they're upset and they're disappointed, but I don't think that they don't kick her out. They don't sort of like push her out. Like, she leaves. And like, I think the scene for me that's always been really rough is like when Lorelai doesn't have Emily in the birthing room with her, where she says like she doesn't want her mother in the room with her. And I know we live in a society where people are like, oh, you can cut off your parents for no reason or whatever and so whatever. I don't see anything that Emily does in the series, at least up to that point, being so severe to do that to your parent. And I think in that way, like the financial obligations I feel are really interesting, because I think like one Friday night dinner a week where you kind of like suck it up and you get your child's, needs met is like something that most people would, dream of. And I think that one of the issues with Lorelai's mentality in the show is that we see from the pilot that her parents are a safety net that she does tap into. Mm-hmm. And I think because she has that always, it makes some of her comments about how much work she's done, not that they don't ring true, but we as the audience know you can always go back. That's your inheritance. Like, you're an only child. You're going to, no matter what, that money is going to trickle down to you.
Absolutely.
And I think that element of that dynamic sort of, as you get older, at least for me, always makes Lorelai seem a little, not whiny, but as if like that privilege is also part of why she feels like her childhood was stifling.
100%. I think like also, it's really interesting you bring up the point about like not ever seeing Emily as that strict, because especially compared to like growing up in an immigrant household, and we see there's like that one episode where Emily meets Mrs. Kim, who she's a town. We're gonna do a different episode on the townspeople, so we'll talk more about Mrs. Kim in depth in a later episode. Also, I'm very much assuming anybody listening to this has familiarity
exactly,
with Gilmore Girls.
We're not gonna give you that much exposition. If you're here, you're family.
Princess and I had a hard time enough like picking out 4 different topics like only to dive into. So sorry if you haven't watched it. I hope that you get something out of this. But anyway, Emily got along with Mrs. Kim really well.
Yeah.
And you know, she haggled with her and it was kind of cold and standoffish, and then she left and was like, I liked that woman.
Yeah.
And that was just a very interesting, because we know Mrs. Kim is even more strict of a mother to Lane. And yet Lane never wanted to cut off her mom. Yeah. Which is really interesting. Well, again, we're going to get into that.
And I would say, just to touch on that, just from a financial standpoint, is that, you know, Mrs. Kim also works for a living, you know, and so she has to manage things. We don't really see her husband playing that role in it. And so in that way, it's like part of why she's stricter on Lane is because they're an immigrant family. They're one of the only non-white families in there. And I think that there is just a lot of anxiety about how you're going to end up. And I think financially, if we look at Emily, we find out throughout the years that this is what she was reared to do, is to be a wife and a mother. She was raised to be an MRS. And so, like, she's very limited. And I feel like that anxiety is something that Lorelai also doesn't really understand until much later.
Yeah. There are moments here and there when I think she feels a bit bad for her mother and, like, connects to her. And then it always comes back to, and then her mom said something awful to her, in her opinion. And it just erases anything good. And it's like, it's just always, her view on her mom is almost like too black and white. And I don't know how you feel, because you watched it for the first time a little bit older than me. When I first watched this show, so I have a different background. I am definitely not from Gilmore wealth. I'd say my parents now are definitely upper middle class. Growing up, maybe a little bit more middle, and they both grew up pretty squarely middle class. Probably lower middle class for my dad, but, like, you know, not super, like pretty comfortable, not super struggling, but definitely not anywhere near this level of wealth, and still not that we would see from the Gilmores, I think. But, like, we are waspy though. Yeah. And I guess waspy has the connotation of being from a rich background, but we are white Anglo-Saxon Protestants. So, you know.
you hit all the marks.
With some mixture of, like, German in there as well. But I think watching it as a young person who felt like Lorelai and Rory, despite the fact that, you know, she was a single mom and I had 2 parents, like, their lifestyle felt pretty similar to mine, aside from the fact that Rory went to a private school. Yeah. So I really, you know, identified with their feelings towards, especially Lorelai's feelings towards her parents, and feeling like she was being stifled, and, like, they were, like, overly strict and overly, you know, rigid in their lifestyle and customs and how they treat people. But as I've grown up, and, like, you, like, kind of going back to what you mentioned about, like, this, like, culture of, like, setting boundaries and, like, cutting off your, like, toxic parents and stuff, the more I watch this show, the more I'm just like, you're supposed to be respectful of your mom. Like, she just cares. Yeah. She just loves you. And, like, my mom is not Emily Gilmore, but there's certainly, like, I know how to pick my battles. Yeah. And, like, I just think, you know, compared to parents who are actually abusive, I just, like, the way Lorelai responds to them, I just don't know. Like, I truly wonder, like, do you think she had, when she was 16, she got pregnant and they were expecting her to get married to Christopher, do you think she ever had, like, actually had the conversation with him, like them, like, I'm not doing this, and here's why? Or do you think she just never tried because she knew what they were going to say? I
think she, like, never tried. And I think because she has such bad communication with them now. Yeah. And I think those are the things. And also, she's the child, and so I want to give her the grace of being like, you're 16, this kind of thing happens, and you're scared. I also feel like if you were, and this might sound a little bit, if your parents were as strict as they were, you wouldn't have gotten pregnant at 16. Like, you know, you would, you know, like, you had a lot more freedom than you give it credit to, because you're looking back at all the things that you didn't get to do that were fun and advantageous. But were those things foundational to what you needed to be the best person possible? And I think you don't know that until hindsight. And to be fair, like, I would suck up a lot for a trust fund, you know, like, I don't have, you know, in the multiple figures, I would just work through it, but that's just me. But I kind of always think about, when it comes to Lorelai, as what does it mean to have grown up in wealth and privilege, then downgrade, but still carry with it all of the things that you already inherited from it. So part of why she's so charming to the, like, people is, like, her confidence, how smart she is, how capable she is. And even though people give her credit for that, like, it's because she pulled her up by her bootstraps or whatever. Like, no, it's because she came from money. Mm-hmm. And she already had those things with her that came from that background. Like, the wittiness of her, like, she's always throwing her intelligence out there, just in the way of, like, pop culture references and those mm-hmm. kind of things in these older movies. But it all is knowledge-based. Like, she's a very smart person. Mm-hmm. And it's because of the education that, like, she got for those 16 years. And that was really important and impactful. That plus being a mom that young and having to utilize all those skills, like, she is so Emily. Like, the way that she runs the inn, like, where do you think you learned how to do that kind of tasking from? You learned it from your mother. Mm-hmm. You just don't realize it because you see her as a bitch. So
100%. And I think it isn't in a Chilton Years episode. I think it's in a Yale Years episode, but she does, like, kind of admit to that in that food court scene with her mom. Like, mm-hmm. she learned from the best. I actually love that scene.
Yeah.
But we'll get to that in the next episode. But I think you're so right. I think there's so many more similarities, and, like, there's a lot of times the show hints on it at this, even when they, like, do their, like, skincare routine the same, mm-hmm. and when they're staying in the inn for, I think, the Bracebridge dinner episode in season 2. But like when Emily and Lorelai are, like, doing their like patting their faces the same, it's actually so cute. But the show very much hints at her being just, like, a lot like her mother. Mm-hmm. And, you know, I think it's kind of true. A lot of us turn into some version of our mothers. But I also think one thing that I feel like is apparent to me more and more with Lorelai is she wouldn't have had. Yes, it took maybe courage to run away from home, but she also was pretty used to getting what she wanted. Mm-hmm. And if she didn't grow up being told, like, anything you want is possible, she probably wouldn't have had the gumption to go to a random inn and ask mm-hmm. for a job and a place to live. Like, she probably wouldn't have, like, felt comfortable just inserting herself into any situation. And she does that throughout the show. Like, she inserts herself
all the time.
All the time.
Yeah. And she moves with an authority of someone that, like, honestly, it feels moneyed. And I think even in her pregnancy, the decision to like, basically go to Christopher, like, I really don't need you to do, like, because she's so proud about that. Like, I never asked Christopher for anything. It's like, you too good for child support? I don't think, like, in this economy, like, you know, like, there are all these things that are supposed to tell us that Lorelai didn't need anyone or anything. The same way how she will always say that, like, Rory raised herself, which is not a compliment. But yeah, but, like, they also talk about how, like, Rory came out, like, fully formed as an adult, and I'm like, and that allowed her in a lot of ways to, like, continue to feed her inner child.
Yeah.
And so I feel like her own Arrested Development is all stuck on those things that she's kind of, like, making up for now. Mm-hmm. And it's like, that's a weird way to parent. Not that it's inherently negative or anything like that, but it is a weird way of dealing with it. And then the money plays into that. Like, why she doesn't cook, which is a huge money hole.
So I did put out a little Instagram story asking for our audience to submit their questions or comments about the Gilmore Girls and money. And the number one comment I got was question I got was, how did they afford so much goddamn takeout?
Yeah. They must have, like, this must have been pre-DoorDash, because, like, just the delivery fees alone are, like, $3, $4, $5. I'm like, plus if they tip, which hopefully they will.
Are there so many places that deliver in 2000 to 2006 Central Connecticut town, like, not even a big town,
and they have Netflix, because they mentioned Netflix on the show, so they have like a video subscription then Netflix, and I'm like, it's so much food. They don't really cook, but they have a huge fridge that is always, like, whenever you open it, like, unless it's meant to be a plot point, there's stuff in it, and they eat it all the time. And even if Luke is, like, comping their meals, which is not a good idea from his perspective, that's a lot of money left on the table, it's like, at a certain point, you gotta learn how to cook. Even me, as someone who, like, I have put a lot of effort into, especially in my adult years, to really figure out how to, like, meal prep a little bit, because the financial waste that you, like, can get rid of if you just eat in half of the week is so substantial.
I have to believe, so I know that they lived at the inn for several years. She was 16, didn't know how to, like, I mean, I admittedly, it took me a long time, especially after leaving home, to, like, realize how to eat better. For sure. Like, to, like, not eat crap. So, like, you know, I will give her some benefit of a doubt of, like, she probably got, so they were still living at the end, she probably got a lot of meals for free, just, like, getting leftovers and stuff from the inn, then moved out on her own with Rory eventually to that house, which I still have no idea how they would have ever been able to buy. Like, there's no way, there's just no way she wasn't, like,
laundering money.
Maybe laundering money, or just, like, in this, like, maybe, I guess it would have been a different time, would have been easier to buy a house and everything, but, like, we know how shitty her credit is. We know, like, how she, like, in a season 2 episode, she needs a loan for termites or something.
She has to ask for help.
Yeah, she has to get Emily to co-sign on a loan with her, and she, like, really resents that. But, like, there's that in that house, like, people have done estimates on what that house is worth. Now it is located in Burbank, California. That's a different place. Although I did look up the home prices in Washington, Depot, Connecticut, where Stars Hollow is based on, and currently they're, like, definitely ranging from, like, the mid 6 figures to the well into 7 figures. So absolutely. Like, it's not a, like, living in a walkable town the way they live in New England is not nearly as, like, homey and and like, it's not nearly as working class as it's portrayed in the show. But that
like, as someone who lived in, like, upstate New York, like, that's different, because it's upstate New York, it's more rural, there's a bigger mixture.
That's the Rust Belt.
Yeah, that part.
Connecticut's like old money.
Exactly. But, like, Connecticut's like that, especially that area, it's like, it's all old money, it's all, like, passed on from families and stuff like that. And
that's specifically talking about, like, small town, walkable, like, quaint Connecticut, not talking about, like, obviously cities like Hartford and New Haven. It's very different and much more diverse, but
the suburbs are there for a reason. They are meant to be isolating. And I think you bring up the credit too, is, like, it always astounded me how little they talk about, like, credit card debt and bills, which, you know, they must have a ton of. Like,
there's no way that they don't. Like, you can't be eating takeout every single night and, like, maybe sometimes having frozen tater tots, although they go to, in season 1, they have a movie night with Dean, and I think she drops $43 on snacks. Yeah. And then also orders pizza. And
then goes to, like, whenever they go to Doozy's and don't check any price, just start putting things into the cart. I'm like, oh, this is a gag.
Also, they're, like, shopping at, like, the cute little town market. They're not going to Walmart. Like, that's not how you save money. Yeah. Going back to what I was saying, though, I can give Lorelai a little bit of a benefit of doubt, not, like, knowing how to, like, cook very well, but, like, the fact that she wouldn't have done at least some sort of whether it's meal prepping or even just, like, putting lunch, like, sandwiches together, or, like, doing boxed pasta and sauce, like, there's just no way if you need to be that scrappy as she needed to be, not like actually needed, but, you know, in her mind needed to be, there's no way you don't learn how to do some stuff. And that's always, like, that's always been ridiculous to me.
I think it's kind of just a narrative dissonance between, like, the wish fulfillment that the show wants to give, which is, we know that.
Also the wish fulfillment of, like, eating as much as they do and having the running joke of never getting weight.
Yeah. And I love the thing of, like, when you watch, you can see they don't actually eat any of the food on the plate, which is, like, so hilarious. And the realities of what it would be like. Because you think of something like Roseanne, where, like, Roseanne was always bringing home food from her jobs when she worked in, like, different restaurants. There was an active mentality, like, when Becky couldn't go to the school because they literally could not afford it. Oh. And it's like, those are the things that Gilmore Girls didn't want to do because it wasn't fun. And they wanted to have the fun of, like, oh, look at Rory going between both worlds and how that impacts her. But I don't think they really understood what that looked like until later on, where they kind of wanted to play with Rory, you know, for lack of a better word, being turned around by like the rich kids. But it totally erased the fact that like even before, because like in the pilot episode, she's ready to be like, I met a boy, I don't want to go to school anymore. She's like, I'm fine. I'll get into Harvard from here, girl.
Oh, okay, well, so
which is hilarious.
But great point to segue though. Why do we think if she left this world behind and she hates everything about the snobby people she comes with, why is Lorelai and just like so obsessed with the idea of Rory going to Yale? Or sorry, Rory going to Harvard.
Yeah. I think to a certain degree, my hypothesis is that it's to prove that she got her daughter into Harvard on her own, which I'm like, that's not the flex you think it is either. Like, and I think also it's the moment I realized that I'm like, you guys are not as smart as you think you are, is, and I remember it clearly, it's the episode where Paris is helping build something, and she's talking about all her extracurriculars for Harvard, and Rory goes, you need extracurriculars to get into Harvard? I'm getting huge just thinking. I was like, what are you talking about? Like, what do you mean?
Sometimes she's so sheltered, it's actually crazy. And it's like, how like, but there's also, she's like such a type A person, and it's like shown to be such a perfectionist. Like, there's no way she wouldn't have known
No way. That she has the pamphlet every friggin' year. Like, what are you talking about? And moments like that as well undermine Lorelai's airs of defiance, because there's a moment where Richard tells her, like, you don't know what it's like to go through this system because you've never been through it. And, like, it's meant to be this cutting moment where, like...
But he's right.
But he's absolutely right, because you literally had this girl walking around thinking she didn't need the extracurricular activities. But at the same time, it shows that you were not actually preparing her for this position very well, because you didn't know what it was like. And I will say, as someone... I did not go to an Ivy League school. I went to, like, a regular private school. But my brother went to Brown. And it's a very intense process going into a higher enchilada school. There's a lot of requirements that go into it, and my brother, to kind of even to just compare, like, we both went to Catholic school, and we both got excited to go to this program called TEAC, and you would do extra work, and it would help you sort of like get into other higher caliber schools. I didn't want to do work in the summers, so I didn't do that. But my brother did, and he ended up going to St. Anne's for high school, which is like a really prestigious school. And then from there, he was able to go to Brown. And that has given him so much more access to these situations and opportunities. Like, now he works for the city. And Rory could have had that if they had done the work to get her into it through the public system. Yeah. She has, like we talked about this earlier, she has a great story for an entry letter. She will have the grades for it. Yeah. And she honestly has a better, in my opinion, besides her being a legacy, her better chance of getting good financial aid would have come from her staying in a public school and then really just busting her ass in every other way to get into Harvard. That would have been such an easier layup than going to a hyper-competitive school where everyone in your class is aiming to be the 1% that gets into Harvard or Yale.
First of all, like, such a fantasy that Rory could have been, like, almost borderline failing a Shakespeare class in her sophomore year at Chilton, and then still go on to be valedictorian. Yeah, that's nuts.
Justice for Paris. We'll get to her, but
well, that'll be this episode, because we don't actually have a Paris specific episode, so she'll pop up everywhere. But the fact, like, so she would have. There's like no question with the way she's portrayed. Like, she would have been valedictorian at Stars Hollow High School. She could have done plenty of extracurricular activities there, and she honestly could have, like, stood out even more, I think, than at a prep school. But, like, if you're at a prep school and you're not a scholarship kid, there's no way in hell you're ever getting any financial aid from an Ivy League school. Yeah. Like, the fact that Lorelai didn't realize that, was shocked when it ended up being because she got that an inheritance from Richard. He, like, made this investment when she was born, and and it paid off. I don't even remember the specifics of it, but it happened to be just the amount of money she owed her parents back for paying for Chilton, which was very convenient. Yeah. But because she had gotten that influx of money, she did not qualify for financial aid for Rory. But it's like, if the school gets to see your financials, like, they would have known, like, Rory has her grandparents. Like, she was also a legacy student. I don't think legacy students ultimately get very much financial aid.
Yeah.
I think that it was very naive of them to think that was like even a possibility.
Right.
And I do think like it's weird. It's just weird that they were like, if they hated that group of people so much, why did they even want to? I know what you're saying about like Lorelai proving she could do it on her own, but like, why do they even want that institutional validation of going through the Ivy League system if they hate that world so much?
Yeah.
Like they resent throughout the show. They resent all of the connections you're supposed to make. They don't like the Huntsbergers for being like those awful people, but like they are still trying to be part of that world.
Right.
It's just,
and she wants to be a journalist, and it's like, so why aren't you applying to Northwestern? Like,
totally.
why aren't you applying?
Or just a really good J school.
Yeah, like there are so many others. Like when I think about journalism, I don't think like Yale or Harvard. I'm sure there are great journalists from there, but like, those are all schools where people go for like medical and law, like,
or like to go on to SNL.
Yeah, or to go on to, or literally,
or The Simpsons.
Exactly. But it's just like, her passion is journalism, but she doesn't seem to really apply herself into those things except to compete with Paris, which is very weird. And it's also just like this way in which they want to have it both ways, because they want Rory to be someone who came from a much like a mixed financial income households, and then come and be kind of like a fish out of water. But she's also a skinny white girl who comes from money and has a good name. So like, how oppressed is she really gonna be? Like, it's very Bella Swan like in that sense. And so like everywhere she goes, she easily gets the position. Like the one time, we'll get into that with Yale, but like at most points she is validated. Yeah. And when she is pushed, like in Chilton, she does learn to rise to the occasion. But those moments happen less and less as the series progresses, because they really want to focus on other things. And I think in that way, the financial messages of the show kind of get muddled, because the further along we go, the more we see how much Lorelai and Rory both need Richard and Emily's money to really maintain anything that they want.
Going back to Paris, though, I feel like she's portrayed as kind of this ultimate poor little rich girl. But she's also shown as like a little bit of a tragic character. Yeah. I think more so than any of Rory's other peers. What's your take on Paris, especially in those early days up to, not getting into Harvard, her dream, and not getting valedictorian?
I had sex waiting into Yale.
She did get into Yale. She just didn't get into
Harvard. Sorry. Mr. Quote. I focus on the sex part.
First of all, would that have ever happened?
Absolutely not.
Yeah.
Like, she bombed an interview, so she didn't get into Harvard. Ridiculous. That doesn't even make sense, dog. Especially because, like, I don't know. I don't want to get into that part. But I think, I forget who said it, but if you're going to be rich on TV, you have to be sad. And I think that, and I feel like Paris has what, like, Kendall from Succession has. Just, like, doesn't seem very loved, not appreciated, raised by her nanny. We don't really see her having any kind of emotional support. Kind of with that whole Draco Malfoy thing, doesn't have real friends, just kind of like lackeys that follow her around. But I think the reason why I like Paris, despite all of those tropes, is that she really is really fucking smart. And she really is working very, very hard.
The best comebacks in the series.
Yeah, she's like, it's National Baptism Day. Like, she's hilarious, she's witty, and she really is working very hard to achieve what she wants with very little support. And I think that makes her more of an underdog. Like, I know that she comes from money, but I don't think we really even know how well off she is in comparison to Rory.
I feel like I haven't even had this thought until you just were saying this, but like, I feel like the way Lorelai saw her upbringing as like so cold and emotionless and like not validating of who she was or anything. I feel like that's actually Paris's reality.
Absolutely.
Her parents are so absent.
Yeah.
The only people who showed up to her high school graduation are her nanny and her nanny's family.
Yeah, and she was so happy to see all of them.
Yeah,
and like her Spanish is really good, and, and like even in the Yale years where she has a relationship with a much older man, it's like that's definitely like daddy issues McGee, which I also hate that they can never let her have premium dick.
We'll get to that in the next episode.
But I definitely feel like that is what makes her so sympathetic, is that she really is trying really hard. And when you see, and that's what makes any time that Rory wins over her, I get really upset because it just doesn't feel as if like Rory deserves it more. Not all the time. Sometimes for sure, because Paris also steps on her own success a lot of the time by being so resentful and antagonistic when she doesn't have to be, and also she has terrible taste in men. Sorry, Chad Michael Murray, but oh gosh, Tristan. But I definitely have so much sympathy for her because throughout the series she really is the person who needs a Lorelai the most, and it's always fun when she's brought into that world and meant to interact with it. Because I think she, in a lot of ways, I feel like she delivers the fish out of water, awkward perspective that Rory is supposed to give. But Rory is just, like, held to such a high standard in the show that it never really clicks.
Yeah. I do love that episode when she, like, kind of edges her way into Rory's, what was supposed to be a, like, solo night. And, like, Jess shows up and then Paris shows up and, like, they all have, like, the three of them have, like, this great, like, these, like, fun conversations, and she gets to, like, actually experience being, like, a normal teenager eating her mac and cheese, not, like, eating what she's not allowed.
Yeah, and her and Jess had pretty good chemistry, I gotta say.
I mean, listen.
It is Milo, though.
I was gonna say, I'm glad the actor was 24 when he was cast on that show, so it's, like, it's a little bit less creepy than still being, like, looking at a teenager and being like, oh my god, he's so cute. But like because like that is generally why I stay away from teen shows now. I'm like, they just make me feel like, why am I watching this? This isn't for me.
Yeah.
I think that this show is better about that than a lot of teen-centric shows. Anyway, digression. But I think Paris is, I think that Rory also gets so annoyed with her so much because of how competitive she is, but I think that Paris just, like, wears her heart on her sleeve, and Rory's just as competitive. Like, she wants to do just as good. She still wants to be the best. Yeah. She still...
And she's never had that before.
Yeah.
Either of them.
Yeah. I don't know.
That's why they should date. That's why we have AO3.
So I am not... I have never actually looked at AO3. I know you're a big fan fiction person generally.
Sadly, yes.
I do, but I am familiar with the fact that there is a lot of Rory and Paris, what's the right word, like
fix or or shippers, yeah. It's like the alternative whenever he's like, all of Rory's boyfriends suck, but there's Paris. And
what do you think of Paris's relationship with Madeline and Louise?
It's so, like, I mentioned, like, it feels a lot of, like, Draco Malfoy and Crabbe and Goyle. It really does have that kind of energy. It just feels like it's a weird thing where in Chilton, being smart also makes you popular. So it feels like inverse of what it would usually be. Like, usually Madeline would be, like, the head girl that you see, and then Paris and the other one would be, like, behind her. But it's, like, because she's so, like, competitive and accomplished, she's, like, the queen, and having these two, like, traditionally prettier girls behind her are kind of her way of kind of flexing her power. They are just really really silly.
I think they're also
handmaids.
I think they're probably slightly more realistic portrayals of, like, prep school girls who are just, like, listen, I enjoy them. I think they're fun. But, like, they're just here to have a good time.
Have a great time.
They have no idea about life outside of this prep school. They're here because their parents, that's what you do. And only surprise for me is that they didn't go to an Ivy League school as well.
Yeah. They remind me of, I forget what the name of that movie is. It's the movie with Beanie Feldstein. It was Olivia.
Oh, Booksmart.
Booksmart. They remind me of how, like, Easy A and those girls that are, like, they are dismissive, being like, oh, you're pretty and you're out there having a good time, so you can't get into a good school. Oh my gosh, yeah. Like, those are their children.
I love in Booksmart when she just assumes because everyone else had a life that they couldn't have gotten into that. That's like the ultimate, like, Paris Geller.
Yeah,
like,
absolutely.
I loved that.
Yeah.
Aside from the weird teacher relationship thing at the end, I loved that movie. That was great.
That was a weird addition. It's like, we didn't need that, girl.
We didn't need that. Anyway, so back to my little list here. One more thought on Rory and Chilton. She is, like, portrayed as such an outsider that, and, like, we're supposed to think I think we're ultimately supposed to think that's a good thing, and, like, it sets her apart from the rest of these, like, shallow or, you know, narrow-minded hyper competitive prep school students, because like she gets ultimately in the episode when she is challenged by, I think, the headmaster, who points out like, you don't seem to have a big social life here. She gets involved with the secret society, the Puffs, who then break into school after hours and in the middle of the night and get in trouble for ringing a bell, which Lorelai rightfully pointed out was very funny that they got in such big trouble for that. But Rory like got to like have this whole spiel about like how she does have a social life and it's just not here because you don't see it. And basically she is ultimately validated by showing like when she got involved, she got in trouble.
Right. This is why the introvert dream, like, this is why I stay in my room. I would have got in trouble in my room.
Do you think that she should have tried harder to be friends with people at Chilton, or that would have been not in her interest?
I think the reason why you go to prep school and go to Ivy League is to make connections, right? Like, so like, as someone who wants to be a journalist, it would just be advantageous to know who people are. I think that someone made a really good point on TikTok that like, when you go to work, you don't have to be friends with everyone, but if you want to get promoted and go into higher roles of management, people need to know who you are. People need to know what you're good at. And I think that it just would have been good for her to have more of a personality besides being smart.
Loving books.
Yeah, and loving books because, like, girl, a lot of people do that. A lot of people have that, you know? Like, I think the thing that is interesting about, like, the Paris-Rory relationship that I think needed to be expanded to a certain degree, and like, as watching it now, is that, like, in the context of academia, Rory is one of tens of thousands of students. She is not that unique.
No.
And so it's like, Chilton was an opportunity for her to actually be around her peers intellectually and really have to compete. And that got synthesized into purely Paris. But I think that the show needed a little bit more of that.
Yeah.
To really show how much harder Rory was going to have to work and not just being like, oh, school is fun. Like, yeah, school is fun. But if your goal is super hard to get into like every top Ivy League school and at that point get a scholarship, you have to know how to do all the different things, and that includes being a sociable person.
Totally agree. Also, like, going back to like her and Lorelai just not understanding how these things work. Remember when she was applying to colleges, Lorelai was shocked she was applying to more than one school.
I was like, what are you talking about, Lorelai?
I'm sorry. You want your daughter to like not have any backups. Also, the fact that she still only applied to Harvard, Princeton, and Yale, like she was like guaranteed to get into one of those. It makes absolutely no sense. She wouldn't have had a safety school. Like I understand that they probably like. Hopefully, they would have still expected her to be able to get into Yale. Although it seemed like when they went to visit it, and Richard kind of tricked Rory into going into that interview, her mom Lorelai was so mad, and Richard rightfully pointed out, you know, she has probably a better chance of getting in here than other schools, and Lorelai like kind of acted like she was like appalled at that and like did it, but it's like, how do you not know that? Like you probably also were raised being told that. But the fact that like she wouldn't have had any like backups is just like baffling to me. And I also just think that she definitely was the kind of kid who would have utilized her college counselor because she liked guidance and liked being liked. And the counselor would never have told you only apply to 3 Ivy League schools.
Absolutely not.
Even at a prep school. Like, that just was, like, not...
That's not a realistic way to do it. And also, like, I think the thing about, too, because there's so much antagonism built into, like, how much Rory's supposed to spend time with her grandparents, I'm like, those are your resources. You should be with Richard all the time in this period to figure out, like, even if you wanted to go to Yale more than the others, like... It will still be useful. Everything that you need to get into Yale, you'll need to get into Harvard and the rest of those other schools. And it's just that sense of ego at play, where it's like, if you want your child to be in academia in like this level of Ivy League, it's about connections. It's not just about merit. And it's like, again, it's that privilege and that whiteness intersecting with them to make like Lorelai totally unaware of that, even as someone who grew up in that world for 16 years.
I think that Lorelai's ultimate opinions on that world and her positioning as of it being like full of fake people and politics and you know, edging out people to get ahead would hold a lot more weight if they didn't want to participate in it. Like I said, I think that her conviction as a character would be a lot more a lot stronger, I think, if she actually raised her daughter on different values that are like, you do not need to, like, you do not need to get into the Ivy League. You do not need to go down this path in order to have a successful life. Like, I like, she herself, like, showed that that's true. Yeah. And, like, she could, you know, go to business school on the side and then eventually be able to run her own inn. And, you know, I just think, like, why, like, it's just so interesting that she never pushed Rory. If she really hated that world so much, why not push her? But, you know, going back to that, I know I keep going back to that, but that's, like, that just, like, it's just, like, because I agree with her. It is a messed up world. The meritocracy is false. Yeah. Yeah, and it is incredibly exclusionary. Yeah. But, like, if those are your values, then why are you even participating?
Right. And it's like, you know, and even when the show will do stuff, like, they'll have the episode where they, like, shame Dean, which we'll get into this next time, about, like, him being like, oh, it's nice, which honestly not something that I think Dean season 1 would have said anyway. He was not that kind of dude. But then they'll have Rory do cotillion. And it's just like, I'm like, girl, that is literally the same thing. Like,
I totally forgot about her coming out ball. That dress was a crime.
It didn't flatter her at all.
A beautiful young woman. Yeah. Alexis Bledel, and, like, that haircut with that neckline. Yeah. The way too long of a bodice. I just, like, that was a nightmare.
I was like, Emily, you couldn't get no Givenchy on here because we know she has an Audrey Hepburn body. Like, let's do what the girl needs.
Yeah, I mean, like, obviously it's difficult to make her look ugly. Like, she is stunning, but, like, that was just one of the more awful dresses, because I think overall, like, some of their outfits are kooky, but I think overall, like, Rory looks dressed pretty well. Like, even in that suit, like, that Vows Renewal episode, that was so cute. Oh, and I loved the dress Lorelai made for her. I still think about that.
That was so good.
Yeah, but also, do you believe Lorelai could have actually made that?
Well, I think it's interesting that that's not her side gig. You know, like, I feel like that would have been a really good side gig for her. Like, doing that on the side, helping out.
Yeah, especially when she was younger, because she had to learn how to sew.
Like, I totally, clothes, I could see, like, that's why she's so close to Miss Patty, because she's Miss Patty's, like, costume designer thing. Like, all those things make a lot of sense about why she would have more roots in the community as well. And I just feel like those are just so many missed opportunities.
They do kind of hint, like, she makes some kids' costumes.
Yeah, she'll help out.
And stuff like that. But yeah, I totally agree. Like they could have dived into that more, and, like, her. Yeah. But also, we're not going to get into all of this because we just simply don't have time. It is hilarious to, like, look at, even with, I'm not the biggest fashion girly in the world, but I can look at all of, in the early aughts episodes, I guess they're all, well, I guess it gets into mid aughts, but especially the early ones, when Lorelai and Rory are wearing, like, True Religion jeans. Yeah. I'm like,
your eyes are like,
all those pockets. I know there's one specific Moschino sweater that Rory wears several times. Like, the costume department, I know it's TV. I know it's like suspension of disbelief, but it is, if you know any, like, even, like, basic fashion knowledge, like brand knowledge, like, their clothes are hilarious, because like, there's no way they're finding all of that stuff on consignment in the middle of Connecticut. Yeah. There's just no, like, because they're not coming down to the city or anything.
Exactly.
But go ahead.
No. My biggest, because I've been thinking about, like, what was the biggest financial moment when you were watching that you're like, there's no effing way from this era? Because for me, it's them deciding that they're going to backpack through Europe with, like, they're like, we're just gonna do it with one bag, and, like, we're gonna.
How did she pay for it? That's expensive for 3 months.
For 3 months, and this is the exact. I think either the episode before or after it, somewhere close, is the episode where she cannot afford to pay for Rory's tuition, and she's like, "Oh, we've been preparing for this for months, not paying for her school."
And you know what? They don't even. That's like, that's at the end of season 3. They don't even talk. They don't say one time, maybe we don't go on this backpacking trip so that we can, like, pay for school. Cool. Yeah. And then Laura gets so upset at Rory for going back to her grandparents to ask them to pay for Yale, but it's just like, babe, you've used them this far. Yeah. Like, do you really want to just not achieve your dreams because Rory needs someone else to pay for school? And, like, they would also like, she insists on it being a loan, which is so, like, unrealistic to me. And, like, whatever. These people can afford to pay for your college. I wouldn't have asked for a loan. But whatever. I know it's, like, principle for them. Yeah. But I think for me, the backpacking through Europe is really something, because I think also, like, I know at that point, in the show, Lorelai wouldn't have had a job anyway because the Independence Inn burned down, and it was before they really started work on the Dragonfly. But that also, like, she wasn't planning to not work at the Independence Inn at that point, but it's not like she would have had paid time off. So was she, like, saving money this entire time, and also how?
Yeah. And I also feel like deciding that you're gonna backpack through Europe is such a, like, privileged thing to think that you're gonna do. And here's the thing, and maybe this is the bouginess in me. If my options are backpacking through Europe and staying at multiple hostels versus having my grandmother just be like, girl, I'll just put you in these hotels, like, we have connections.
Which
here.
She did.
Which she did anyway. I'm just like, that's the one that you choose. And that saves you money anyway. And I just feel like backpacking is treated as, like, very, like, easy peasy to do. It's very hard. It's very expensive.
Logistically difficult.
And because you have to have things arranged on time every time. And also, like, backpacking is just two women.
Yeah.
Is, like, especially in the 2000s.
I think that's another instance of, like, Lorelai never actually feared for anything, which is a privilege, because, like, everyone should be able to go through life, like, not being, like, scared of, like, what they're gonna encounter, you know, while traveling. But it's just like, again, would you have that kind of gumption if you didn't have the background that you did?
Right. And 3 months not working.
3 months not working is crazy.
Yeah.
Also, like, that Rory, I guess she sometimes worked at her mom's inn. Sometimes, but like, she never had to have a job, and, like, I didn't have to have a job in high school during the school year. I was, like, allowed to just focus on school, but I had to have a job in the summer.
Yeah, I didn't have to have a job, like, because I was so focused on school. But when I was in college, I worked.
Yeah,
I worked in college. I had, like, a student thing, and I also found, like, a part-time job because I wanted to have money.
Yeah, and
I knew that my mom was working, so, like, she couldn't always send me a bunch of money, so I had to work.
Yeah. I think that if Lorelai was actually, again, interested in instilling more, like, working class, pull yourself up by the bootstraps values, and Rory, like, she would have had to do more.
Yeah. And also, like, backpacking through Europe, why not have a road trip across the country? That would have been much cheaper.
And they had a car.
And they had a car already, a pretty big car.
They had a Jeep, right?
They had, like, a Jeep Wrangler for, like, no reason.
For absolutely no reason. Also, one of the worst financial decisions of a car you can pick.
It was ridiculous.
So, like, the worst gas mileage still. Also getting way more accidents. That center of gravity is crazy. Ugh, no.
A whole mess.
But makes no sense.
But, like, traveling all across the country, driving together would have been so much more financially feasible. Yeah. Like, backpacking through Europe is a post-college trip, in my opinion, versus a post-high school trip. Like, girl, she's gonna come back. Like,
I know. And I always, like, I never did that because I never had to go that much time without working. Yeah. I mean, I guess now I could figure it out if I really wanted to, but now I'm like, but then I would have to deal with having 3 months no income, so that, you know, I'm not personally interested in it anymore, but I do feel like when I was watching it as a teenager, I was like, ugh, that's sounds, it was a very romanticized notion in my head, which I think they had as well. But, like, even if you do it on the cheap, going for that much time, it's because they definitely weren't doing, like, work first day in hostels either. So, that was really interesting. Yeah. I do think, going back to your original question here, though, like, the financial moment, that's, like, the least plausible, or, like, the most, the most convenient is still that Richard, like, coming in at the last minute with, like, $175,000 or whatever it was, $150,000 for, I think it was $150,000, and it was, like, 75 pairs of Jimmy Choos was, like, what Lorelai said she could buy with it, because of some investment he made on her the day she was born. And just, like, there's a couple moments in the series like that where it's just like, oh, here's this giant lump sum of money, and it's like, you know, do I think that's unrealistic for that kind of family? Not really, because like, I do think when you have money, those kind of windfalls happen more often. But the timing was really convenient. And you know, the takeout habit is nuts. The expectation of, like, other people helping, like just, like, getting so much help from that, like, everyone in town, like, Luke does all of their handiwork. They, like, never have to hire anybody to like do any work on the house unless they, like, have termites. Like, it's just, everything's taken care of for them pretty conveniently. And I need to mention, like, I do still love Lorelai.
Oh yeah,
I think Lauren Graham is amazing.
Yeah, no one else could play that character but her.
Right. So like she wouldn't this show wouldn't have lasted as long as it did. She wouldn't have been like, people wouldn't have loved her if she wasn't like very likable and very like affable. And I think she does have good qualities, but this particular podcast is about money, and that is like where I have a lot to say.
Yeah. I'm a Carrie Bradshaw defender. I'm never gonna be like,
same deal with SJP.
Yeah, I'm not gonna throw the baby out with the bathwater. Like, I love Gilmore Girls. It's one of my favorite shows of all time. I think it is, in like my opinion, like in like easily top 20 best American made like sitcoms of all time. We're just also critiquing it because every show in that top 20 would have a similar critique to this, because a lot of shows already deal with middle class delusion, where they create characters that are supposed to be middle class, but they never actually deal with anything having to do with that. Like, everyone has like unlimited resources until it's like a special episode where it's like, Dad lost his job at the mill, and then we have to have a whole crisis about it. Like, so it's a larger problem in television of like, if we have to stop the show for our characters to go to work, that's not something that we want to deal with.
Yeah. I that wouldn't be as interesting of a show. Although, so we'll get into this in the next episode, but season 4 is my favorite season, and I think a big part of it is because we get to see so much of the inner workings of them setting up the inn, and I think that was like that was really fun plot lines to me. Yeah. So to wrap up, we're getting close to an hour now. So to wrap up this episode, I do want to talk a little bit more about the elder Gilmores. Mm-hmm.
My favorite characters.
Well, okay.
More Emily, though.
Oh, that's really interesting. Mm-hmm. So one of my husband's biggest green flags when we were first starting dating was he was like more than happy to watch Gilmore Girls with me. And he had never seen it. And he has since seen it, several times. But he, unlike me watching it as a teenager, he was in his late 20s, an established person, also from a much more working class background than the Gilmores. He immediately, his favorite characters off the bat are Emily and Richard. Yeah. 100% like has absolutely like no like zero like empathy or sympathy for Lorelai. Is never on her side during any fights. And to his credit, he was extremely close with his grandmother, and an elder polite woman who just wants to talk to you
every day.
Every day. That's his favorite person. So I will give him that. But why are they your favorite characters?
Well, first of all, fun fact, I have known your husband since when you both started dating, which I think is like the funniest thing to be like, they're so adorable. It's so funny. I find whenever I talk to Gilmore Girls fans who are actually not from like an affable situation, we all kind of like Emily. Totally. And I think it's because, just as a quick comparison, I think because we can see that Lorelai is much more privileged than she perceives herself to be, it's more annoying. I expect rich people to be annoying and
fire all their maids.
Yeah, like everything about Emily is on the tin of what I expect from her. Totally. Like, so when she has moments of like actual depth, I'm like, oh look, she's got layers to her. Yeah. And I think that, like I said, someone who comes from like a very, and I don't even have particularly strict parents, but as someone who grew up with people who were single mothers, came from strict households, like weren't allowed to do certain things, like hardcore, weren't allowed to do certain things growing up. Like everything I see Emily and Richard do, to an extent, because there are definitely episodes where they make them push the envelope to continue the narrative, are just within the realms of like reasonable expectations for like your teenager who you were guiding through life as like your only child. Like, we don't know why they didn't have more children. It could have been a lot of issues. Like, we don't really see that discussed, but like I've always felt like they probably would have wanted to have more children, but they probably couldn't. So like Lorelai is like, for lack of a better word, like their investment. And I think like that's not a great thing that for parents to think, but I think especially for their generation,
maybe does give a little bit more credence though to like her only child syndrome. Yeah. Like her like kind of self-centeredness though. Yeah. Anyway, continue.
No, for sure. And so I feel like Emily is trying to make these connections, and because money is the language through which Lorelai will communicate with her, that's why, per one of your questions, why the reaction to like her paying back the money was so visceral, because it was like, so that means that like the only thing that you even wanted from me, I can't even give you anymore. And I think that that's just so sad. Like I think, like I said, the flashback where we see her like not want to have her mother in the room with her for delivery was just like really, I don't know, very heartbreaking. Like, I'm very close to my mom, and like my dad is in like, you know, the late stages of his life right now, and it's like my dad and I have had ups and downs, but if I were blessed to be able to have a child while he was alive, even with everything that we've been through, I would want him there. Like, I can't imagine having a non-abusive parent like be someone that you would shun out of your life that way. And I think that's kind of the problem with the narrative, is that I don't really see them as that bad. And I think also, like, I remember so clearly the episode where like Emily's trying to set Lorelai up with some guy, and she goes into her bedroom to sneak, and she's like, please don't let me go back, daddy. And like,
but he lets her
he lets her go.
I love that.
And then when he brings her the dollhouse and leaves her up, like, those episodes are like instantly what I think about when I think about them, which is why really jump forward in the spinoff, when she can't name a good moment with Richard, I was like, that's ridiculous.
I can name a good moment.
I can name them right now, girl. What are we talking about? Like that, and that's why I think it's hard sometimes when the show shows you like how much her parents care, why they're so, in some ways, kind of stunted, but how they always have her back. Like, show up to her graduation when Rory absconded. You know, like, they are very proud of her. They just come from a generation that really doesn't know how to communicate. And at a certain point, even though I definitely think that parents shouldn't have to parent their parents, that's a lot of parent in one word, I do think that if you want to have a connection with your parents, at a certain point, you have to learn how to communicate with them like an adult, especially when you yourself are an adult.
Yeah, and I do think, you know, we only hear snippets of like how Lorelai was treated, right? We see like that one flashback episode, which, by the way, terrible casting. That girl was like nowhere near as good as Lauren Graham, and was not believable and didn't even look like her. But anyway, right. I digress. Sorry, I hope she's not listening. That actress, but I'm sure she's better in other things. Anyway. Like, if they were actually abusive, she would never have gone back. Yeah. They would never have seen them again. Like, well, I mean, maybe not never, but knowing who Lorelai is as a person, like, if she truly felt like she was in danger, going back, like, she wouldn't have. Yeah. And she wouldn't have put Rory in that situation. Absolutely. Which makes me think, like, you know, you don't like them, and you felt stifled, and you wanted your kid to have more room to be, you know, just like genuinely who they are, and not have to like live up to certain expectations. And I do like understand where she comes from for that, but it's just like, if your problems were really that big with them, you never would have taken anything. You actually wouldn't have taken anything from them, and you probably would have not wanted your daughter to go down that same path of like the Ivy League school, everything. Yeah, I feel like if she had either like cut them off for real, like never spoken to them, I would believe it more, and then like her going into thing. Or if she felt like, honestly, a lot less pressure on herself to pay them back. Because if I hated my parents and I'm only coming to them for financial help because I need to help them, I'm not paying them back a goddamn thing. No, it's like pride. It's like your own sense of pride. And I'm like, I honestly feel like if you really dislike them this much, keep the money, girl. That was, I think I had that in my questions. I think I either skipped it or I didn't actually write it out. But do you think she should have paid them back then and there the way she did? I think from her character perspective, I understand why she did it. I would not have. I don't think they wanted the money. They definitely don't need the money. Well, I think it was a bad financial decision. I think it was a bad financial. That would have been such good money for her to reinvest in the end if things happen. Or put it aside for Rory. If you don't want to keep it for yourself, then be like, Rory, here is your stuff covered. Everything else that isn't covered from your grandparents for the rest of like if you want to go to grad school, because that's all something that could have happened on the table. Like, I just felt like it didn't make any financial sense. It was all a character beat, and it just caused a lot of tension between her and Emily that I feel like they had to evolve beyond. Like, I feel if I'm Lorelai, I'm like, if I do this, she's gonna be upset. Yeah. And I don't know why you'd want to upset her. Yeah. And from a purely financial standpoint, it's like there's absolutely no way that she was paying interest on that. And even if she was, it would have been super low. And so, you know, you don't need to prioritize those kinds of things. You, like, I think she should have taken that's such a blessing, that kind of lump sum of money when you don't have money. I totally agree. She should have invested in the inn. We never hear her talk about retirement. Not that we would, because it's TV, but like put it in something like that. Like put it in some investments and let it, like, that kind of money could have gotten her so far.
Yeah, because having the ability to save that much money because you have that kind of financial support is what so many people need and wish for. And I just felt like it's one of those moments where you realize that, like, you are watching a TV show, because totally. Like, it didn't make any sense.
Yeah. And just one more thing on the Gilmores. Some people had questions about what we think their net worth was. I looked at a Reddit thread that everyone was arguing either for like the $10 to $20 million range, and them getting, after his mother died, closer to the $50 million range. But I also found an article of making an argument from cheatsheet.com, so grain of salt, but making the argument that they're worth more than $50 million with the type of Richard's job and his title as EVP, and the structure of those kinds of companies, and the fact that he had probably some kind of revenue share agreement. He probably was making in the upper six figures a year, but on top of that had generational wealth, so like maybe put them more in the $50 million net worth range. They also donated an astronomy building in the years, which makes me think they had to have more than $10 million, because you wouldn't donate such a big proportion of your net worth.
I don't know why, but I've always seen them as sort of like, and this might just be because this is the only thing, like kind of like adjacent to like later Vanderbilt money, of like not enough that they can have multiple sets of inheritance, but like have enough money that like they wouldn't need to work and work to accumulate or maintain that wealth.
Yeah, I think Richard's obsession with work is very very of that generation, but also like in line with well, like what we see statistically as wealthy people working more, because it's like a badge of honor and like a status symbol more, even like along with having their money. Absolutely. But he definitely didn't need to work.
Yeah, because I think we find out that they came over on the Mayflower, so like they've been here for a long time. So I always kind of think that it was like low hanging later generation Vanderbilts. Yeah. Or like maybe like middling Kennedys, definitely
old money though.
Old money, yeah. And I think that's also the thing, is like it's also the 2000s, so like old money went a lot further than it would today. Yeah. And so I think they like definitely more than $50 million. The way they throw their money around, the way they have banquets and everything, like, and also their property, like the maintaining of their property alone, even if it's already paid off the property tax and everything like that, they have to definitely have like a really solid foundation that they're just adding on to, in my opinion.
Totally. I think that, but more like, we'll talk about it, when we talk about Logan more, but they are shown as not being as rich as some people in their circles, but they still have just as much status. And I think that's because because of their class, more so than their actual finances, is like their social standing, as like Christine Baranski's character in that awful show, The Gilded Age.
Yes, which I do watch every day. No, you're right. It is. What's on every.
I only watched the first season. I couldn't do any more with the Meryl Streep's daughter. Just I couldn't do it. Sorry to this woman.
Sorry, that woman. We'll talk off the mic, but no, there's definitely so much to unpack with that, because it's just like inheritance on top of inheritance, and like I think that. It's just money. I don't understand it. I don't even know what Richard does for a living. He's an insurance man.
My father was an insurance man. Well, in the next episode, when we talk more about the Yale years, which, like I said, some of my favorite episodes ever, I think there's a lot more to unpack with Richard and Emily's dynamic in terms of their finances and their who controls what and how and what her life has been. And also, I'm pretty sure Trix dies in season 4 too. So that was we'll get to that in the next episode. Anyway, thank you so much. Thank you, Princess.
Thank you for having me. I can't wait for next week.